What is value? What kinds of values are there? Value is certainly not the same as price. Nietzsche mentioned that little value has anything that has a price. But even the price you pay in money is of course related to values, and even money does have some value. It's just that the term value refers to a lot more than just the price to be paid in some currency. Sometimes you have to pay a dear price in something other than money, and frequently you have to weigh different values against each other in order to choose which is more important to you. Axiology is the part of metaethics that studies values. I will talk more about it in this video, but first I want to remind you to subscribe to my channel and click the thumbs up button. First, I want to point out that we use various kinds of sentences in everyday language. A value statement is different from a mere neutral description. For example, someone might say that the decision was made slowly. That is just a description, although the slowness mentioned could also be related to values. Some may think that decisions should be made slowly, while others might think that everything should be done as fast as possible. That way, people could attach different value judgments to the same event, but that goes beyond the original sentence. The thing being judged is called a value object. Making value judgments requires the use of value concepts. For example, the decision was unjust uses a value concept, which means that the statement is no longer value neutral, but a judgment. It declares how something is related to values, and in this example, specifically values that have to do with ethics. Not all values are, but values are closely connected to norms. I will expand on norms later in this video, after first explaining value judgments and certain important categories related to values. Later, I will have something to say about the hierarchy of values, and finally, I will give an example of research in axiology. First of all, it is fairly obvious that there are both positive and negative values. Things we want and those we definitely don't want. This is easy to understand even in terms of money. You may be willing to pay for a nice meal, but you'd have to be paid a significant amount of money to make you willingly eat spoiled food. Things that you want can be said to have positive value, while things you dislike have negative value. Usually words like good and bad are used instead of positive and negative, especially in the context of ethics. Commonly, something is just said to be of value, meaning it is of positive value. For example, when people are asked what their values are, what is generally being asked is what people value positively. For example, health, freedom, free time, relationships, and relaxation. The expressions used in moral language are not necessarily quite as clear as the sentence, "Honesty is a good thing." While such sentences are also used, it is more likely that in everyday language people use phrases like "liars suck," "that dude is a damn liar," and others like that. In some cases, no words are used at all, yet the message can still be clear. For example, a nod of approval, or clapping can be used, as well as exclamations like booing. The point is that philosophers studying values may have to interpret several ways of expressing value judgments beyond the written, clear, grammatically correct language. While we may be mostly interested in moral values here, axiology studies all kinds of values, and there are several types. I will give some examples. Economic value refers to things like wealth and the evaluation of commodities. Aesthetic value is about the appreciation of beauty. Hedonistic value relates to enjoyable experiences, such as the taste of a drink or other such pleasure. Religious values clearly are connected to religious beliefs, so different religions will have different religious values. Other values are connected to social life, others again to the environment. There are even values connected to the ego or self and power, and not only in the obvious immoral sense, lust for power being generally considered a bad thing. Individuality is not a bad thing, while being about the self, as is selflessness, I suppose. And equality is a value that has to do with the distribution of power. I won't even try to make an exhaustive list of all the possible types of values, as there are many, but I think I have listed at least the most important types already. Perhaps the way language is used is a bit confusing here, because objects are considered to have value, but also individual people as well as cultures are said to have values as well. The latter are, in a sense, subjective values, and unlike with the objects that simply have some valued properties, these subjective values are ideals and goals people consider important. Aesthetic value, like beauty, can be thought of as a property of an object, while moral values like fairness are easier to see as ideals, as they are more abstract and obviously not in things. An individual's values may be their personal values, or they can be cultural values, shared by the majority of the members of that culture. There can of course be conflicts between personal and cultural values, even within the same person. Today's multicultural societies are necessarily also pluralistic with regard to values, but even a more uniform society with nearly all members sharing the same culture, the individuals would still have their own values and value hierarchies. That is, some people put their values in a different order than others. What matters for society is that the individuals share enough of an understanding of values that they manage to coexist peacefully. Differences in matters of taste or aesthetics don't matter so much, and we can accept that other people just have a horrible taste in music, for example. But ethical and social issues are more serious, and economic matters are often closely connected to both social justice and ethics in general. It follows that opposing political views can and do collide when good people want to actually help others and create a just and fair society, while selfish, greedy individuals just want to avoid paying taxes. When deciding what political parties and policies you want to support, you should find out what kind of political and ethical philosophies they are based on. Not what the politicians claim necessarily, but what they actually seem to be doing in practice. Some values can be separated from others by virtue of their necessary nature. At least life, health, food, water, shelter, and warmth are necessary for our existence, and some call such things strong values. These are distinguished from high values, which are not necessary the same way strong values are, but may be still considered even more important, at least by some. These high values may be about personal self-actualization or otherwise highly personal subjective aspirations. They could be art, science, equality, freedom, liberty, or other lofty ideals. Some people actually risk their own health and life to promote such values. If you don't have anything that important in your life, perhaps you have been living with a proverbial blindfold on. Perhaps you should finally start to wake up and see what really is important in life. But be careful when choosing your values. While some heroic individuals have risked themselves for worthy goals or even died for them, far more have been moved to wage war or otherwise kill others for what they mistakenly thought was a noble and good cause. Values can be thought to be relative or absolute. That is, a value could depend on who, what, where, and when is making the judgment. For example, you might not generally think of water as particularly valuable, although you probably should. But if you find yourself lost in the woods or just thirsty after strenuous exercise, you may find a bottle of water to be highly valuable. Many think that moral values are not relative like that, but rather absolute, always the same for everyone, everywhere. This, of course, is not accepted by everyone, as I have explained when covering the different metaethical theories. But regardless of one's moral views, what is generally accepted is that moral values do differ from most other values. What is good or bad seems more important than most other things. Honesty is good, dishonesty is bad, at least most of the time for most people. Sometimes it may be acceptable to lie because of a higher moral value, such as life, but very few people would seriously claim that honesty doesn't really matter. Once in your lifetime, you may have to lie to save your own or someone else's life, but you'll probably want to be reliable and honest in all other situations and expect the same of others as well. It has also been suggested that some values are especially protected or sacred. These would be the highest values. They are also examples of intrinsic value, something valuable for itself. Not all intrinsic values are considered protected values, but it is hard to imagine how a protected value could be an instrumental value, something useful for a purpose, but extrinsic to the truly valuable purpose or thing itself. For example, money is probably the most commonly recognized instrumental value, because few would think that money is valuable for its own sake. Money is only good for what it can be used for, to buy. It is only a means to an end, while intrinsic values are ends in themselves. The pursuit of truth, also known as philosophy, is an intrinsic value to me. I have lived in relative poverty for most of my life because I have not needed much wealth to practice philosophy. It is not always clear what has only instrumental value and what has intrinsic value. For example, friendship may be considered by some to be a means to an end. To me, that sounds like false friendship. But even if a friendship is considered valuable in itself, it can also be of instrumental value. The value of a friend can also expand to what the friend considers valuable. You might not care much about old books, but if your friend does, you will probably treat their old books with respect. Values are important for us because they direct us. We aspire to achieve our goals to get what we consider valuable. We avoid things we consider of low or negative value. We, as groups, societies and cultures, form norms to guide us, and those norms are based on our shared values. If we value punctuality, we tend to expect it of everyone. In Finland, for example, being late from an appointment may not be considered acceptable, certainly not without a good excuse. Sticking to schedules is important for us as well. In order to enforce the norms, sanctions are required. There are both negative sanctions, such as punishment, blame, or ridicule for breaking the norms, as well as positive sanctions, such as reward or praise for upholding the norms. Norms are usually duties, but can also be rights, showing what is allowed and where the limits are. For example, speech may be free, but exercising one's free speech may also be negatively sanctioned if one causes others harm through such speech. Falsely accusing others of immoral or criminal acts, or of having an immoral character, is generally considered libel, and could also be considered hate speech in some contexts. Legal norms are explicitly stated, for example, as laws described in law books. Other norms can be implicit in a culture, where everyone is just assumed to understand how people are supposed to behave. How you greet people, what and how you eat, and other things like that are not typically written down anywhere. They are just customs. But even implicit cultural norms can still be clearly connected to morals. For example, heteronormativity means that expectation and requirement that everyone exhibits heterosexually stereotypical behavior, especially, but not exclusively, in matters related to sexuality and sexually characterized relationships with others. That is, there are ideas about what boys and girls are supposed to be like and how boys are supposed to like girls, even eventually marry girls and so on. Such a norm is usually implicit and only becomes apparent when someone breaks the norm or intellectually wakes up and criticizes the prevailing norm. Just wearing the wrong kind of clothing can reveal the norm when closed-minded people react to what they perceive as breaking the norm. Moral norms are intended to uphold moral values. While there are rules in games, which may also be called norms, they don't have anything to do with morals. But breaking those rules in order to cheat in the game is a moral issue, because it is a moral matter, a form of dishonesty. The rules of the game only apply in the game, but moral rules are usually thought to be universal, applying to everyone, everywhere, always. This means a moral law is an eternal law, lex eterna, while mundane, legally binding laws are only temporal, lex temporalis, and can be changed from time to time. It is also often thought that moral norms are autonomous in the sense that they are only based on moral values and not anything external to morals. This is why laws and morals are seen as clearly separate things, and sometimes highly moral people have been forced to resort to civil disobedience to fight the state for what is right. Of course, not all thinkers accept the aforementioned claims about the fundamental nature of morals. That is why there are several different theories of ethics, or metaethics, as I have previously explained. See the link in the description for more on those theories. It is clear that there are conflicting views of what is valuable and how valuable. There is also a related conflict of norms. If there are real values based on some objective reality, then it might make sense to think that we can put those values in a hierarchical order to see which values are more valuable than others. For example, moral values have been traditionally considered more valuable than any other. The problem is that it is not clear that this is the case. And if there is no objective basis for moral values, then it certainly seems that all you can do is put your own values in a hierarchy of their own. Problematically, even this may be impossible to do rationally. Yet there is really no good alternative. The way I see it, truth has to rank highest, because everything else depends on truth. Any claim you make is also a truth claim. So seeking the truth is important. But seeking abstract truth is also clearly not as important as saving the life of an innocent, so even I might have to resort to dishonesty if put in the right kind of horrible circumstances. What I'm left with is trying to do my best, rationally seeking a compromise between different conflicting values. Regardless of your metaethical views, if you actually care about ethics and want to live according to some morals, whether they are based on your own ethical thinking or some moral framework you have adopted, you are going to have to think and possibly even debate ethics. This means formulating arguments for and against different views and opinions. That is what practicing philosophical ethics is all about. An example of axiology is Georg Henrik von Wright's analysis of the concept of good, titled The Varieties of Goodness, translated to Finnish as Hyvän muunnelmat by Vesa Oittinen. Some people are unhappy to learn that the book shows that goodness is not one thing, but rather there are many different kinds of goodness. Here, for example, are some varieties of goodness. Instrumental good. A hammer is good for nailing things down. A rock might work, but is not as good. The instrumental goodness of something depends on how well it can be used for some purpose. Technical good. The skill level at doing something. How well one is able to perform the skill in question. I'm not very good at using hammers and nails, but I can type well enough. Olympic athletes are incredibly good at things they compete in. Utilitarian good. Providing free education is beneficial for all members of society. Utilitarian goodness can be closely connected to instrumental goodness. Things that are beneficial for us may be so because they enable us to do other things. Good infrastructure enables traveling, good hygiene, and even internet connection. Having enough income enables us to not be deprived of food and shelter, and to be able to purchase the things we want, like philosophy books. General welfare in society increases public safety and peaceful coexistence for all. Good for health. Using a bicycle as your daily means of transportation is good for your health. The organs of your body are good if they function effectively. Good health or wellness is mostly defined as absence of poor health and sickness. Hedonistic good. Eating good food is a pleasure you can enjoy. So is reading a good book. You may be able to enjoy the company of other people as well. Pleasure and enjoyment are not only sensual but have a mental aspect as well. Pain, such as muscle ache resulting from exercise, can feel good. Pushing yourself past what you have considered your physical limits may cause you suffering, but also intense mental pleasure. Or so I'm told. Happiness and the good of man. Enjoying the conditions of one's life. For example, I live in relative poverty, but as long as I can do what I consider important, remain mostly in control of my own life, and do not suffer from deprivation, I am as happy as I can be. Luck and innate dispositions are significant for achieving happiness. Moral good, or doing good. Actions have consequences for other people. Those consequences can be beneficial or harmful to them. The intention of the actor is important in assessing the moral value of the act. A good person is, in a way, good in a technical and utilitarian sense, but it can be argued that moral good is also something separate, independent of other goods. This was all I wanted to say about axiology and values in the context of metaethics. I hope you'll stay tuned for my next video. Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.